Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to this evening's meeting on the Waterford City and County Development Plan. My name is Vanessa Liston from Civic, and I'll be your facilitator for this evening's webinar. This meeting is the second of three that are being held this week. Yesterday evening, we had a session on the topic of environment and heritage, and the video from that meeting from yesterday will be available on the Development Plan webpage on Waterford Council's website later this evening. And that is at consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. This evening's webinar is going to focus on local placemaking, and tomorrow's webinar will focus on education and agriculture and economy, and that will start at 7 p.m. and finish at 8:15. So our agenda for this evening includes three presentations on different topics related to the theme of local placemaking. We're going to hear from Maurice Conway, Executive Architect, on the topic of placemaking. We will hear from Vinnie O'Shea, Administration Officer in the Department of Economic Development, and he will discuss local development. And we'll hear from Owen Dulay, horticulturalist within the Environment Department, and he will talk about open space. We'll also be hearing from Senior Planner Liam McGree, who will give an overview of the strategic issues involved in the preparation of the development plan and this initial phase of the public consultation. Before we kick off this evening, I just want to point out the Q&A panel that you see on your right-hand side. This is where you can pose questions to the speakers during the course of the meeting, and they will get back to you when they're finished their presentation. So feel free to pop in as many questions as you can. This is your chance, and you will get written responses. For any questions that can't be reached within the time frame of the meeting, they will be responded to and published on the Development Plan website, consult.waterfordcouncil.ie tomorrow. There will also be a Q&A session at the end, and this will be the opportunity for the speakers to pick out some of those questions that you have answered and to comment on them more broadly and to give an overview of the questions raised. So without further ado, we will start and welcome our first speaker, Liam McGree. And Liam is Senior Planner within Waterford City and County Council. And the purpose of the Planning Department is to provide for the proper planning and sustainable development of the county, to promote and facilitate the development of sustainable communities and enterprise, and to ensure the protection of the natural and built heritage and amenities of the county. So Liam's presentation tonight will give an overview of the initial public consultation and the strategic issues involved. So Liam, if you'd just like to share your screen there and bring up your presentation, you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Vanessa. I hope you can see that at your end. As Vanessa said, Liam McGree is my name. I'm Senior Planner with Waterford City and County Council, and I'm just going to give you a brief outline as to what a development plan is, what the process is in terms of the making of a new development plan, and how you, the public and vested interests, stakeholders, can become involved in that process and have a real say in the future of your city and county for the next 6 years and beyond. So what is a development plan? Well, the elected members of each planning authority make a development plan every 6 years, and that sets out a framework for the development of the whole of the county. It's important to note that it's the elected members, the members that you elect, that are responsible for making that development plan. We as officials advise the members in that regard. We assist them in drafting documents, bringing forward proposals, but it is members that ultimately at the end of the day will adopt the plan. And the plan will consist of a written statement and a series of maps, and those maps will illustrate various objectives such as land use, conservation, roads objectives. And all development then is assessed against that development plan, whether they're applications for planning permission made by members of the public or whether it's the local authority's own development projects. They're all assessed against the development plan, and only those that conform with the policies and objective of the plan would be approved and will proceed. Also, when the local authority is making applications for funding to central government for various infrastructure projects or other developments that we would like to progress, those applications are again couched in terms of the development plan, and the government departments in most instances, that's the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, will assess our proposals against our own democratically adopted development plan. So the plan is a medium to longer term blueprint for the economic social development of the city and county. As I say, it covers a period of 6 years, but it will obviously look beyond that 6 years because many of the investment decisions that need to be taken now will have very longer term implications. That's just an example of one of the maps that you'll typically find in a development plan. That's your land use zoning map for the city, and it shows various different land uses, residential, commercial, industrial, open spaces, amenity areas. So the development plan has to provide an overarching strategic vision for the development of the city and the county, and it sets out integrated policies and objectives to realise that strategic vision. The plan has to be consistent with national and regional planning policy. There's a hierarchy of plans, national at the top, regional in the middle, and then county and city development plans at the bottom. So there has to be consistency between each one of those layers. The plan has to be evidence-based. So again, we look to statistics and we look to surveys to inform the policies and objectives that come forward. It's intended that it would be a catalyst for positive change and progress and ensure the protection of the environment and heritage. The ownership of the development plan by the members and by the wider public is vital because it's only through the actions of a myriad of different agencies and through development by the private sector that many of the objectives will be realised. There's only so much that the local authority can do through its own resources. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to guide other agencies and trying to guide public sector investment to achieve the best possible outcome for the city and the county as a whole. The process is a transparent, open process. I'll just walk through some of the steps here now. All of the information that I'm going through here this evening is in our issues paper, and I'll point you towards that towards the end of the presentation, just so that you'll know where to find that, and that might answer some of the questions that come to mind as a result of this presentation, or as Vanessa said earlier, we'll be open to answer questions at the end. And as I said, the plan is evidence-based. We depend on statistics from the Central Statistics Office, from the census, travel to work data, employment, unemployment data, housing data, lots and lots of different data sets, which we analyse, map, and use to inform our policies. The layout and content of the plan, as I say, it's a written document with a series of maps attached. The Act, the Planning and Development Act, sets out a certain number of mandatory development objectives that must be included in all plans, and they're listed in the blue box below. So those are objectives such as urban renewal, amenity, natural heritage, landscape, character, views, prospects. But obviously we'll go well beyond that in our development plan. Those are just the minimum requirements for a development plan, but the development plans that have been adopted in recent times tend to be very comprehensive documents, and our plan for the city and county will be no different in that regard. The background, as I said, there's a history in that Waterford City and County Council was established as a body, as a corporate entity on the 1st of June 2014. Prior to that, we had Waterford County Council, we had Waterford City Council, and we had Dungarvan Town Council. And each one of those three authorities had their own development plans. You'll see images there of the three documents. The county plan was adopted in 2011. The Dungarvan Town Plan 2012 and the City Plan in 2013. Now all three of those plans are still live and still applicable as we speak, and will be until such time as a new unitary plan is adopted for the entire city and county area. Normally those plans would have expired after 6 years, but we were required by government to wait until the National Planning Framework and the regional, spatial and economic strategies were in place before we adopted a plan, so that those national and regional policies would give it some context. So our plans are a little out of date at the moment, but they will be replaced by one unitary plan covering the entire city and county. Below the level of the county plan also will be providing detail for larger settlements. Previously there were local area plans for Tramore, Lismore and Portlaw. We would anticipate that in the upcoming development plan we would also include objectives to provide detail for those larger settlements in their own standalone local area plans, which will give the people living in those settlements, living in those towns, a very clear indication as to what development they might expect, where schools are to be built, where the open spaces are to be provided, what works the local authorities might be intending carrying out, and what level of development in terms of housing and other commercial development they might anticipate. The National Planning Framework and the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, as I said, those have both been adopted. The National Planning Framework on the left-hand side of your screen there was adopted by government on the 29th of May in 2018. And following on from that, the regional assemblies, there are 3 regional assemblies, the country's divided in 3. We're in the southern region, so the Southern Regional Assembly adopted the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy for the Southern region, and that came into effect on the 31st of January this year, 2020. So now that that regional strategy is in place, we now bring forward policies and objectives which support that and realise the vision at a national and a regional level in our county. There are also a series of mandatory guidelines that the councillors and the local authority have to have regard to in drafting a development plan and in all of our activities generally. These are called Section 28 guidelines. It's Section 28 of the Act, and there's a long list of them. There's just a sample of them. So we've got policies at a national level in terms of building heights, flood protection, wind energy, renewable energy, provision of schools, roads, and that type, all of those sectoral issues have to be addressed in our development plan, and in addressing them we have to have regard to national guidelines. So the process then, we'll just break it down into a number of stages. This first stage is the preliminary stage. Now we've cleared that stage, and that we've over the last 12 months or more we've been working to develop a set of statistics, to develop some baseline data, and to bring together an issues paper and to bring together an agreed approach as to how we're going to go about this project. So the issues paper, which again it's available on our website, that's a copy of it. That has been published and it's on our website. As I say, it was published on the 20th of July. It's on display until the 14th of September. We'd ask anybody that has an interest in the future development of the city and the county to make a submission in response to that issues paper. The issues paper, I suppose, it doesn't set out policy positions on behalf of the local authority because we're at the very start of the process. What we're doing is we're outlining the topics that have to be covered. We're prompting you with some questions. We're giving some statistics. There's some infographics in that, and we're asking that the public would come back to us, tell us what you think is important and what needs to be considered, and what suggested approaches we might take. So once the initial public consultation is over, we're in stage 2 now. At this stage, we've published the issues paper. It's been on display for a minimum period of 8 weeks. The Chief Executive then does a report to the elected members. In that, he summarises all of the submissions that have been made and makes comment on those submissions and recommendations to the members. The members then consider the submissions and they issue a recommendation to the, or a direction really, to the executive as to how they would like to see the draft developed. The executive then go away and draft up the plan on their behalf, bring it back to the members. If the members are happy with the draft, they will put it on public display. If they're not happy with it, they'll direct us to make additional changes, which we'll do, and then it goes on display. Again, there's a formal public consultation at that point. The public are invited to review the plan, and we will have sessions like this again. Hopefully we'll be able to meet you face to face at that point. That'll be in June of next year. Once we've considered all of the submissions, or once the members, your elected members, your elected representatives have considered all of your submissions, they'll then make a further set of changes, which are referred to as material amendments. This is stage 4 of the process. And those material amendments will go again on public display. So there's 3 rounds of public display or public consultation. We're in the first round of public consultation at the moment. The second round is when the draft is published, and then the third round is after the material amendments have been published. And once the submissions in relation to the material amendments have been considered, the members will move forward to make the plan. The entire process takes somewhere in the region of 99+ weeks, so it's almost 2 years. So it'll be summer of 2022 before we have a new plan, but there's a very strict timeline that we've got to follow. It's set down in legislation. We don't have an awful lot of wriggle room on that. There's a lot to be done along the way in terms of environmental assessment, strategic environmental assessment, flood risk assessment, and various other assessments that have to be carried out along with those public consultations and the all-important debate that will happen amongst your elected representatives as to what direction we should take. So, as I said, the initial public consultation has commenced with the publication of the strategic issues paper. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the various topics or headings that are covered in that issues paper. It's available on our website at consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. We ask anybody, as I said, that has an interest in the future of the city or the county to make a submission. However, submissions should relate only to the proper planning and sustainable development of the area. We'd like you to focus on the issues, and the issues paper is designed to try and focus that debate. Proposals regarding specific zonings are not being accepted at this point. At the pre-draft stage, we would ask that people would comment on the high-level strategic issues to give the elected members, a direction as to how the plan should be formed and formulated. At the later stages, in stage 2 and stage 3, we'll certainly be able to consider submissions in relation to this field or that field or this area or that. But at the moment, we're talking in broad brush. How would you like to see how would you like to see your area or the city or the county develop over the next 6 to 12 years? Submissions must include your name, contact address, and a map where appropriate, probably more appropriate to the latter stages, where people are identifying particular land parcels. But, again, you might include a map if you're, if you've got comments to make in relation to open space or amenity or access or whatever it might be. So that's submissions. Again, they'll be received. There's a number of ways in which you can make those. You can drop your submission into us in writing in the normal way. You can post it in. But what we have this year and what we're very excited about is our new portal. And this will enable us to gather all the submissions together in one place, and for those to be visible to the members, visible to the public generally, and for us to work with those submissions as they're received. Again, if you go to consult.waterfordcouncil.ie, you'll be brought through the various steps that you need to go through. You'll see a split screen there. The one on the top left hand side is the first screen that you'll come to. It'll prompt you to register as a new user. Once you've registered, it's a very simple process. You'll be brought to the second screen, and that contains a number of YouTube clips, some information in relation to frequently asked questions. A copy of the issues paper is available there, and that will take you through the process. Most of what's being discussed this evening will be available there, as I say, in PowerPoint presentations, in video clips, and I would encourage everybody to go onto that website and to use it to make your submissions and to make your views known. Again, the address is there at the bottom of the screen. It's consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. We're available to you throughout the process. If you want to ring us at any stage, we'll certainly, pick up the phone. We'll talk to you. As well as doing this online consultation, we are available to meet people on an individual basis if they've got difficulty accessing our website, or if they don't have access to the internet. And as I say, submissions will be received by post in the normal way if that's what people prefer. So I'll sign off at that point, and again, I'm available to answer any questions that anybody might have later.
That's great, Liam. Thank you very much for that very clear overview. And just a reminder that submissions will be due by the 14th of September at 5 p.m. So if you have a question for Liam, if you'd like to pop that into the Q&A panel there, and you'll be able to respond to those during the course of the meeting. Our next speaker is Maurice Conway, and Maurice is an executive architect in the Department of Economic Development within Waterford City and County Council. And he's a graduate of WIT and UCD, and Maurice's previous experience includes the role of town engineer. Maurice has been involved in a number of community-led infrastructure and amenity projects, and is currently collaborating on a number of town master plans and development strategies and has recently participated in the Department of Rural and Community Development's residential vacancy pilot scheme to encourage town centre living. And Maurice's presentation, if you'd like to share it, Maurice, it will focus on placemaking in a city and county context. So Maurice, you're very welcome. If you'd like to bring up your presentation.
Hello, sorry. Apologies, I just had some technical problems there. Maurice Conway, I'm an Executive Architect at Waterford City and County Council in the projects team. We're responsible for placemaking, public realm and urban design projects in the city and our towns and villages. Exciting, the new development plan. It's the first time that we've had an urban and rural development plan, as Lee mentioned. Apologies, I seem to be having some connection.
No problem. If you'd just like to go to slideshow mode there, Maurice. Yep.
Problem.
That's perfect.
Okay,
there
so
you go.
I'd just like to start with the Van der Hagen painting commissioned by the City Corporation in 1736. It's the first time we see an image of the city, and it's projecting the city in a particular way. It's a vibrant, prosperous city, a good place to live, work and do business. The city we see in the painting is in transition. It's 20 years or so after the demolition of the medieval walls. So it's the first time that the city is open for business and open for trade. It's a little bit like, I suppose we have connections with our current city insofar as with our proposed new river crossing and the development of the North Quays. We're a city in transition. We're a city that's trying to rebalance itself north and south of the river, and a city that's trying to connect to the river. I suppose the way we approach placemaking is twofold. It's top down, so with the development plan, master plans, and bottom up, which relates to projects. The projects need, I suppose, to be robust. They need to be interchangeable within the greater plan, but I suppose they need to be community driven. The projects need to support our approach and our city. The team that I work with are all about streets and spaces. That's what we spend a lot of time working on, and our streets and spaces must support our communities. Here we got Cathedral Square. About 20 years ago, this phase, I suppose, of development of the city work started. The plan was to create a series of spaces that were flexible, could be animated, were accessible, and were people friendly. The city decided to declutter, to take a seamless kind of approach to these spaces, to concentrate on high quality materials, and to make sure that the spaces were interconnected. Here we've got John Roberts Square, again a space that's very flexible, very usable, but very much connected to other spaces around the city. We see here a ground plan map of the city. The colours show the various quarters. The area in the centre in red shows the retail spine connecting north-south. The orange is the Viking Triangle. The grey is the cultural quarter, which we're currently working on, and the green is the Ballybricken and the Glen area. We divide, I suppose, the city into areas and quarters to allow us to concentrate on their individual kind of character and develop them along. But the important thing to see here is the white space, is our streets and spaces that connect the city together, the porosity, the areas that allow you to move through the city. This is something that's very important to us. So we've got the oldest city in Ireland, and we're very happy to tell the story of the city, and visitors seem to like it. But also we must remember that the city tells the story of us. The city is a reflection of us and a reflection of the way our society works. This is 2002, this is Broad Street. This is what this phase of work started with. 25 people in this picture, 26 cars. Not a great street. This is the same street, Broad Street, in 2015 at our Harvest Festival. I know which street I'd prefer to be on. So when we start, we look at what we have. We try and understand where our city has come from, how our streets have developed, what are the assets and opportunities. We've got an ancient street network in the centre of the city. We've got city walls. We've got a historic city. We get the opportunity, I suppose, to write the next line in the story of the city, and that's what we try to do. So 20 years ago, we started at John Roberts Square and the retail spine. We had a car park and quite a busy road. Now we've got a very flexible space that cares for an awful lot of activity day and night throughout the year. This, I suppose, is our latest offering on that retail spine. It's at the southern end. It's the Apple Market. Originally, people sold apples there. Through my lifetime, almost 50 years, it was predominantly a taxi rank. We've roofed it. We've got a very flexible space which is animated by the restaurants and pubs and clubs around there. But essentially, we think about it as the city's living room, and I think it hasn't reached its potential yet, but we're getting there. We're back to the Viking Triangle, and 10 years ago, the yellow spot, yellow area at the centre was Cathedral Square, which was the only public space. Over the past 8 or 9 years, we've actually developed and reclaimed space. That's the orange space you see, and this is public space that we've reclaimed. It was there, we just took it back. These broken lines that you see between these new spaces are pedestrian connections. In some cases, again, they were there, we just reclaimed them. But it's a way of thinking, and it's a way to connect these spaces, and it's all about connectivity. It's all about allowing people to move through the city. People are the lifeblood of the city. Reginald's Tower, our oldest building, and a remodelling of a space. Interestingly, the small building you see next to Reginald's Tower was mentioned twice in the annals of Dáil Éireann, once in the early 60s when it was built, when it was commented that they complimented the city at constructing such a modern building next to its oldest building. And next, a few years ago, when we demolished it, and it was commented that the city had demolished such an ugly building next to its oldest building. There you go. This is Bailey's New Street, and Greyfriars, the national monument. It was separated from the city. There was a car park in front of it. Through working with the Office of Public Works, we've taken that back. We've got the largest wood carving in the world, and we've also got a space that's used by the neighbouring pubs and restaurants. It's used for festivals. It's a very flexible space, and again used throughout the year. This is our Bishop's Palace garden. Was a council car park, has been reclaimed. The area down in the bottom left is one of the best selfie spots, I suppose, in the city. It's very popular with tourists. It's the Ephraim Strongbow seat. You can see there's a garden then just on your right, which overlooks the Mall, which is one of our busiest thoroughfares, but it's an observation platform. It's quite tranquil. You can sit there and watch the city go by. Very successful. This is our medieval museum, which is an award-winning building. It gave us a new streetscape. It gave us a really up-to-date, a wonderful new museum. And it also gave us much needed back-of-house and service area for Theatre Royal. Here you've got the Undercroft, which was part of the medieval museum. It sits below the deanery. Most people in the city didn't know it existed until a few years ago. Now it's a super enclosed civic space which is available to all. This is another thing that we do in the local authority. We have the ability to tackle an entire block. This is Parade Quay. The top picture there on your left is probably circa 1850, 1860. Down on bottom left is the way we found it about 7 or 8 years ago. It's very dishevelled. the backlands are, well, you can see from the roofs, the house that Jack built. Working with a number of people in the area, the museum, Jordan's Public House, a local restaurateur, Fall to Ireland, and the Fumbly Exchange. We transformed the block into, you know, quite a pleasant area, and it's part of those new connections. We have the new Museum of Time, which we're scheduled to open next month. And just on the top left of the picture, you see Block B, which is a residential block, which we're currently trying to move on with. We would hope to have 10 residents over 5 commercial properties. This is Chairman's Arch, which connected Peter Street and Greyfriars. It was closed for about 70 years. Reopened in 2014, 2015. It now houses 12 super apartments that are owned by the council, and they're some of the finest, I think, apartments in the centre of the city. It's not all about you know, existing work and remodelling. We work with our forward planning section on looking at some of the newer areas of the city. This is the Kilbarry framework. And the image there focuses, I suppose, on what we would like to be the University Avenue. It's the WT's Cork Road campus. It's about understanding how, you know, an urban hub or a suburban hub, I suppose, would sit in the city, how it would connect into the existing surrounding neighbourhoods, how the connections through that, which what we would hope would be a mixed-use hub, could be developed, and how it would connect back into the city. Quite important. I'm working on a number of those projects. As I said, it's urban and rural. We've got 28 towns and villages. The network of towns and villages is quite important for the local authority to understand how that works. Capquin is a small town in the west of Waterford. Very strong community groups that work there, very strong links with the local authority. We recently, or the town recently, was awarded funding to look at a master plan and develop the town. Certain problems in the town, I suppose, needed an overarching plan-led approach, but again, to pull together those specific community-led projects into that. Some specific, I suppose, issues for Capquin would be vacant properties on the main street. Capquin would have that problem in common with most Irish towns. The housing market, again, most Irish towns would have maybe an issue at the centre of their towns. Typically, to acquire a property and refurbish it would cost much more than the finished property would end up in those towns. So that's a problem. Look at our public realm, the connection to the river. So some amenity works around the town, and the Blue Way. The Blue Way being the Blackwater, which you can just see in this slide here, very important as it connects and has the potential to connect Capquin to its neighbours in Lismore, Aglish and Villierstown. The connection with the river and Capquin is important and something that ourselves and the community groups in Capquin would like to look at. Tramore, a town, our largest town in the county, has a lot of very, very strong community groups, very, very strong community projects working there. Again, we're involved in an overview, I suppose, capacity, but also working on specific projects. The town has probably works in two ways. It's a seaside resort, and it's also a dormitory town for Waterford, but it's also a town proper at its centre. Traditionally, there would have been a notion in Tramore, where is the centre of Tramore? You know, people would have asked that, and it's a question that came up again and again. There was also been a perception that it was difficult to navigate around Tramore. It has a very steep main street. It rises 40 metres in 400, which is 1 in 10, which is quite steep. The narrow streets, difficult enough to drive around and traverse. So there would have been certain issues. So we chose the town centre as a project to kind of to maybe link these pieces together. Hope that we could connect the main street to the beach. That was one of the issues that we wanted to do. So we decided, when we canvassed and worked with a lot of the community groups in Tramore, we found out that in most people's mind's eye, the centre of Tremor is around the V Cafe or the junction at Queen Street, Broad Street, Main Street. So we decided that, okay, that's the centre of Tremor. We decided we would pull together a circulatory route around the main street that would bring people in towards the centre of Tremor, but also would bring them around the centre, so you could drive in and get around, and there now was a centre. One of the other issues, that because the main street was so steep, there was parking at the top and bottom, and being I suppose a rural town, we're still very much reliant on the car. So the idea was to see, could we find some parking on the halfway up the hill on the main contour, and that was something that we did. So that's, I suppose, the centre of Tremor as we see it now, and that's the centre of a fine junction, but the centre of Tremor as we would like to see it. So something given back to people, a space that commands some very good views. It always gets the sun, and I suppose we're working there at the moment. A lot of upheaval for more people, and the main street especially, but something that we're working through, and hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later. Thank you very much. I hope that was of some use, and please get in contact with us if you've got any ideas that you'd like to share. Thank you.
If you have any questions for Maurice, if you'd like to put them in the Q&A panel, and Maurice will have time now to go through those and reflect on some of those at the end of the meeting as well. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Vinny O'Shea, and Vinny's going to speak about local development. Vinny is Administrative Officer in the Department of Economic Development in Waterford City and County Council. And Vinny has specific responsibility for rural economic development, and the rural section seeks to work with business interests, communities and relevant partners to improve the economic performance of rural Waterford. Their focus is to unlock rural enterprise initiative, support partnership working, and sensitively exploit the economic opportunities for those who live and work in rural areas of Waterford. Vinny has also worked in the community services and sports section within the council, where he led the Sustainable Neighbourhood Unit and was coordinator for Waterford City of the Urban Generation Programme RAPID. So Vinny, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. And I suppose this presentation, I suppose, follows nicely and very aptly, I suppose, from what Maurice would have done. I suppose to allow maybe the county tell its own story, and the story of county people as well, to give it a bit of a more of a rural flavour in relation to how rural communities within Waterford County can play their role in relation to shaping the future of the county within the development plan process. So I'd like to give maybe just a small outline of looking at local placemaking, specifically from rural communities, looking at local development and looking at local development opportunities and how they're shaped within rural areas, and then more specifically looking at rural economic development and looking at the resources that are currently being provided by central government and locally to ensure some of those opportunities can be available. So I suppose, first of all, I suppose the communities, the whole notion of local placemaking. Local placemaking it's very much, I suppose, looking at the whole concept of a sense of place. Where does communities, where they feel that they have characteristics that give people that sense of place. I come from a certain place, and I feel I come from a certain place because of, and sometimes that because of could be local geology, it could be agricultural, the historical agricultural agriculture of an area. It could be old industrial practice. It could actually be the lay of the land, and that gives a sense of place. And in some cases in Waterford, ones that would be immediately that people could associate with would be the likes of Comer Uplands, the Copper Coast, the Blackwater Valley. And these are areas that have been utilised by Waterford City and County Council to look at developing what's called communities of place. And I suppose that's after emanating from the local and economic community plan that was done back in 2015, where people that had that sense of identity, such as the Cumberlands, would come together and look at how best those areas could be developed and conserved to develop sustainable rural areas within Waterford. And I suppose, just following on from what Liam said, and making sure there's consistency between national and regional planning policy, it was great to see on Chapter 5 within the National Planning Framework the whole concept of planning for diverse rural places. Because even though Waterford isn't the biggest county in the country, yet it still has very diverse rural places. So each time you'll see small snippets of national policy objectives within the National Development Plan that actually give people that are viewing these presentations opportunities to look at what the national policy is saying that might inform maybe potential submissions going forward. So I suppose following on from what Maurice was saying, towns and villages have a very important function in relation to driving development within rural spaces. So you'll see there's two different photos of towns and villages within Waterford County. One is on the left is Lismore, and that was taken a long time ago, but you would say that could easily have been taken maybe something like 3 months ago, because the landscape and charm of Lismore hasn't changed that significantly. And you then on the right hand side have Kilmacthomas as a result of what the Greenway has meant to that, and how the village and Waterford Council worked together to avail of the natural asset, or the asset that it had, which was the old railway line, and how it was, I suppose, changed and used as an economic driver to come along and drive regeneration within the village. And again, there's national policy objectives in relation to that. But I'll go and maybe delve a small bit further into what towns and villages and how they can be developed, and potential opportunities that are there for towns and villages and communities within the development plan process. I suppose traditionally, and when we're looking at settlements in past development plans, whether that was in the city or whether it was in the county, it looked at what a village was or what a town was in the context of whether it was a district service centre or a local service centre. But did that mean that much at the end of the day was a question that I suppose maybe was answered, maybe wasn't answered. But we have on our right hand side here, it's from the Strategic Investment Board. It's I suppose a representation of what a hierarchy of settlements and related infrastructure, what should be in a small town, what should be in a village, what should be in a large town, what should be in cities. And all of those within that diagram are opportunities, and they're opportunities that maybe we could utilise in the development plan process. How can the development plan make provision for better services within rural communities? What key infrastructure would you like to see in the development of your area? And I suppose it's important that we utilise that opportunity by going to consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. So when looking at the opportunities within the local development context, and following on very much from what Maurice was saying, where he was looking at public realm and regeneration in towns and in the city in particular, rural areas equally provide plenty of opportunities with whatever natural assets or local assets that they have. So the opportunities that the development plan can make provision for can include anything from town and village centre living, something that Maurice was talking about in relation to Cap Quinn, the whole area of agricultural diversification, local energy production, rural enterprise, outdoor recreation, and festivals and events could be a potential area where local rural communities could maybe seize and sensitively exploit an opportunity. And I suppose they're issues that maybe again refer back to the regional spatial and economic strategy and the national planning framework, where there is good direction in relation from a policy perspective to inform any potential submissions. So here you have two examples of a festival and event you've all together now, which has been significantly successful as a music event within Waterford County. And Festival of Food in Dungarvan, and unfortunately both those didn't happen this year. And looking again at the whole food area and its an opportunity and potential, and the whole fishing and how that's developed, and how fishing communities which don't really sometimes get forgotten about, and to make sure that they're part and parcel of how the county develops over the next 6 years and beyond. So again, there's national policy objectives in relation to that, that maybe catch some of those potential areas, and the diversification in particular. What worked maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago is not working probably today. So we need to look at where there's opportunities and to ensure that counties, the rural areas within the county, can avail of those opportunities. And as Liam suggested, it's probably the opportune time to make sure that some of those funding mechanisms, which I might talk about later, that the development plan makes provision for some of those priorities that could be identified within rural areas and within the city if they're encapsulated within the development plan itself. So there you have the Greenway. Again, you have the National Greenways, Blueways and Peatways strategy, which is trying to, I suppose, look at the development of greenways across the rest of the country and maybe copy to a certain extent what Waterford Greenway and what they've done up in Mayo. But equally, opportunities in the whole area. It could be great houses, it could be gardens, and let's not forget, I suppose, we do have a geopark, a UNESCO designated geopark, which has significant potential for that whole Copper Coast area. And there, again, I know that they've made one submission within consult.waterfordcouncil.ie, and it's ensuring that the rural communities within the Copper Coast area can benefit from having that status, whilst also making the best of the natural assets and geological and industrial heritage that the Copper Coast has. Here's just one example. I suppose it's on the top right. You have an old cottage within Villierstown, with through the, I suppose, the innovation of the local community, are looking to come along and develop Montessori school. They have glamping accommodation units, a rural enterprise hub, digital hub space that will potentially, when it's finished, they're looking to just have a final package of funding, but it would provide opportunities for remote working, which has become the norm over the last number of months. And it's certainly something that there's opportunities for people to live in rural communities, something which was probably not talked about or unheard of before, because the momentum was always going from rural over to urban, and the difficulty that we had maybe 2 years ago was how do we sustain rural communities. Over the last number of months, there's a momentum and change in relation to people going back to their rural homelands and trying to work from home. And if that can be facilitated and enabled as part of the development plan process within communities where that might be appropriate, well then it would be great if submissions came from communities to restate. So I suppose the questions we're asking would be, what do you think are the issues for sustainable local development in Waterford? And what would people like to see in the development plan to address these? So again, there's, just put it up again, consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. And I suppose a lot of people might have ideas, but how they are resourced or developed is another thing. And just want to maybe highlight quickly that there's significant rural economic opportunities as a result of government funding over the last number of years. Wasn't there before 2015, but it significantly changed since then. So you have FLAG, which is a fisheries fund. There's outdoor recreation infrastructure scheme, which is very much geared towards trail development. The town and village renewal scheme, which is being used to generate some good projects within towns and villages in Waterford, that comes out on an annual basis. And Morris would have just referred to the Rural Regeneration Development Fund that was allocated towards Cappoquin. And equally, there's an urban fund that's been allocated to allow the work that's happening in Tramore. That, on top of what Waterford Council provided, local contributions for a lot of projects, and I suppose there are general services that they do provide, and not forgetting what Waterford Leader does as part of their rural development strategy. There are funding mechanisms there to actually enable communities to avail of some of the opportunities. And it does help, as Liam said, if some of those priorities would have been identified at an early stage, so that when funding submissions could be submitted, whether it's in 2022, 23, 24, that it's already in existence within the development plan process and it had been identified as a priority. Just a quick glance in relation to some projects that would have been done over the last number of years and as part of town and village renewal. So on the first picture on the left is the Ardmore Cliff Walk renewal. So that was a restoration of the Ardmore Cliff Walk. On the middle you have the glamping pods within Villarstown. So there's 4 glamping pods, and that's a highly successful community enterprise. And on the right hand side is a boardwalk that the Bunmahan Tidy Towns would have worked with Waterford Council in ensuring that there was a boardwalk on the sand dunes to protect the dunes and also provide accessible services for an accessible route for the general public. So I suppose the question we'll be looking at is, what do you think are the important projects and priorities that can contribute to more sustainable rural communities in Waterford over the next 6 years? And I suppose very much beyond that. And I did see a submission coming in from an individual in the Older Persons Council, a question. And that's something maybe just to bear in mind, that our population is getting older, and in the next 20 years it's going to significantly increase. And maybe some of that planning needs to happen at a very, very early stage. And how do we maybe future-proof for older people and ensure that, and that includes service delivery. What are the types of services that we would like in towns and villages that make sense? Because there are a whole series of towns and villages that are dependent on each other. And again, the settlement hierarchy that Liam alluded to needs to come into existence there, rather than every town or village looking for their own hospital or swimming pool. And it just needs to make sense from a rural perspective, and equally then sync in with what Boris is talking about in relation to the city and with the county. So I'm happy to answer any questions that will be there afterwards. Again, I'm just going to make a submission, please visit our website, consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Vinny, for that presentation. And just a reminder, our presenters, both Vinny and Morris, will be available now to go into their Q&A panel and to respond to the questions coming in. I'd now like to welcome Owen DeLay, and Owen is going to speak about open space. Owen is a horticulturalist with the City and County Council, and Owen is responsible for the management, maintenance and implementation of pleasure, recreation and other grounds in Waterford's parks, gardens and open spaces. And this includes, among other things, the management of our tree stock, both within the parks and public open spaces of Waterford City and County. So the title of this presentation is Understanding Open Space. You're very welcome, Owen.
Thanks, Vanessa. Apologies there, it's a bit of a slow start. Again, welcome everybody. And I suppose my first thought when I was asked to give this presentation was a title, and how would that title be helpful in people coming to a place to bring them to a place where they can put a logical and I suppose meaningful submission to interact into, I suppose, our development plan. Again, the purpose of this evening's event is certainly the preparation of that development plan. And thankfully, and I suppose this has been very helpful for everyone, there are a number of key questions set out very simply. They give us, I would think, a fantastic resource to begin, to question, to stop, I suppose, because certainly the preparation of a development plan needs and requires a momentary step back, to review, I suppose, our current situation before we make a plan. But certainly that is what a plan is. It's future. Without looking at the future, we certainly must look at the past, and I suppose take a chance to review. So certainly these key questions, and hence the reason I've put this slide in here quite early, is because this certainly gives us a great resource to begin. And I suppose equally then, my talk tonight will, I suppose, hopefully add resource to help you work through those series of questions. So I suppose we have to start with some historical background to get an understanding of open space. And I've just inputted a number of lines here, particularly more so in relation to open spaces rather than the general greater sphere of the development plan. So I suppose one important key date here is 1934, and this was the Town and Regional Planning Act. So this created the provision and the remit of the local authority for open space. I suppose again the next important key date is the 1963 Local Government Planning and Development Act, and this set out objectives for preserving, improving and extending the amenities. So this is a further step along the road in the provision of parks and open spaces for all persons. Equally again in 1987 the Department of Environment, Heritage and Local Government published a policy for the provision and maintenance of parks, open spaces and outdoor recreation areas. This certainly is now over 30 years old, but seemingly the only national advice that local authorities have in providing parks and open spaces and other outdoor recreational activities. Equally, we have some high-level or European and national level resource that we must take cognizance of. Equally, one of those certainly would be the biodiversity strategy, and this is a very important piece because it recognises the biodiversity loss in Europe and sets out a mission to halt this. So equally, responding to that biodiversity strategy, the EU published Green Infrastructure titles Enhancing Europe's Natural Capital Strategy, May 2013. And this again sets out to promote and the deployment of green infrastructure in the EU and urban areas. And this does certainly come back down to our level here in Waterford, and beginning at a European level, it works its way into our local level as well. Equally, we have the National Landscape Strategy. In a very similar vein, it aims to promote the protection and the management and planning of the landscape. At a regional level, we have the regional planning guidelines. These are a little bit more prescriptive details and how areas can be enhanced, I suppose, through the development plan, the local area plans and other processes. And at our level, the county level, we have this development plan. This provides for the provisioning of zoning of land for recreation and open space and sets out objectives for the preservation, improvement and extension of amenities and recreational amenities. So very important, the development plan. Again, tonight's piece is on open space, and ultimately within open space we have parks. What is a park? Unfortunately, I have put in a very technical description, but it certainly gives us a good understanding for what a park is. And very simply, it's a planned environment. So there's a form of planning which typically correlates with open space allocated reserved for fully or partially for the purpose of public recreation. So a very specific aim that our objective is the public recreation in a planned environment. And equally, a park can comprise of natural elements or man-made elements or a combination of both. And certainly we would have many examples of parks throughout County Waterford, both in the city and the county, right across from certainly some older parks, notably the People's Park of the late 1800s, the Dungarvan Town Park of a similar area, to more modern parks, again, an example would be the Millennium Park in Lismore, or more natural or naturist parks in the Anne Valley Walk, where the local authority would have worked with the local community in providing this. So why? I suppose the question is, why is a park important? Certainly, my graphic on the left gives us I suppose, a very clear interpretation of the world nowadays. The world has become much more busy. It's been more congested. And equally, us as people, we're become more busy. That we're on a continuous tighter schedule. We're continuously chasing for time. So where is the outlet? What is an option to resolve both the world's issue and that our lifestyle issue? So equally, parks are acting as green lungs for the urban environment, and that they act as a focal point which breaks up this environment. They promote a healthy lifestyle and can influence the increase of quality of life. And finally, they can counterbalance the harsh reality of the hectic life that we are enduring in these days. I mentioned the purpose or the understanding that a park is to create public recreation. And we can further break that into passive recreation and active recreation. Classic examples of passive recreation can be walking, relaxing, meeting, sightseeing, picnicking. Active is much more of the outdoor play in playgrounds, running, cycling or bird watching. I suppose again, it's important for us to understand why we visit a park. What is the reason? Are we looking to seek out the passive recreation or the active recreation? And it's a challenge then for the local authority to I suppose, discover and provide these facilities within parks to cater for these forms of recreation. Alongside that, equally, we have a hierarchy of open space. So we have a number of different types of parks, and these are very simply broken down to give us some sort of sense of what each park would ideally contain. So very simply, at the very small end of the scale at the start, that we might have the pocket park. So these are usually more found in cities or big urban environments where they will have an important and visual and social function, and not necessarily include formal play areas. These typically are stronger in the visual sense. You have a lot of passing traffic, people get a visual and take enjoyment and recreation from that sense. Then we have the next size that would be classed as a small park, and these may include items to encourage passive recreation. The next scale from that would be considered a local park, and typically these would include playground facilities to encourage passive and possibly biodiversity areas. Beyond that, we have a neighbourhood park. Again, these would very much include a wide variety of facilities and, of course, biodiversity areas due to their larger size. And at the very end of that, or the top end of that scale of parks, it was often considered the regional park. These are there to provide a large range of uses. They're generally have spaces of formal and informal play. They include biodiversity areas, and the probably underlying key is the distinct attraction or number of attractions. And you'll see again on that very opening slide we've raised the question to bring thought into the debate in regards to a regional park. Going back just to review on how open space what is the interaction with the local authority and open space. So lands can become open space through three main processes. The open space is acquired by the council. It's dedicated public open space, land generated through the planning process, or lands that are transferred to the council. So equally, when we look at open space, it's very important to look at the qualitative emphasis rather than the quantitative. This is very, very important because it brings the value of parks questioning the value of parks and open spaces. Public open space can have a positive impact on both physical and mental well-being, and this is becoming much more and more important every day. That we've recognised this in the last number of months. It equally provides spaces to meet, interact, exercise, and relax. So, listing a key number of points, we can see the value of parks and open spaces through the public health value, the community and sport value, the enhanced property value, because equally this adds value when people are connected to parks, the ecological natural system value, the heritage and the tourism value. Parks and open spaces are certainly a shop window for local authorities, and equally on the other side of the coin, they're a source of pride for local communities. Open space and play. So traditionally we would have found in open space, or particularly in parks, that a key feature within a park would have been the bandstand. This would have been the traditional point of call, the centre point or the focal point within a park. Typically in Victorian times and moving along, this would have been the place to provide entertainment. Parks were certainly a sense of a getaway from the rustle and the bustle of the daily life. And typically within our older parks, you will see that the landscape is screened on the perimeter using large trees to create this sense of enclosure. But nowadays it's recognised that play is equally important, and it's a very common theme through very much in our open space and parks. So play and recreation activities are essential childhood experiences which enrich the lives of children. They provide the experiences that will serve them well in later life. And recognising this, the National Play Policy was launched in 2004, and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs titled a document, Ready, Steady, Play, a National Play Policy. And thankfully, Ireland became one of the first countries in the world to produce a detailed National Play Policy on play. So we've again breaking play into the two broad categories. We can break them into formal play, which are very often come as playgrounds with metal and timber play equipment and safety surfaces. These are much more common. We will largely see these in most of our parks throughout the city and county. Equally, we have the other broad aspect of play in the form of natural play. And nowadays, many children, particularly, are growing up in urban environments and do not have the same natural play opportunities. And very much the thought is moving towards this. It's the informal or the natural play, and it can encourage the senses within children. In Ireland, natural playgrounds little less more uncommon, and tend to be found in regional parks on the greater scale of parks. I mentioned the quantitative standards. So how do we set out in judging is a park or an open space has it got the quantitative standards to provide that park or that amenity for the greater public? And if we take probably the 5 most key important quantitative standards, they can be taken as such: the design, the layout and the facility. Particularly in larger parks, they need to meet a range of user needs. This must be broader, including both the active and passive recreation. Accessibility. Parks should be located to be no more than close to the majority of homes in that area. Playgrounds, again, should be carefully sited so they're both easily accessible. Variety. What is the variety? A large range of open space typically should be considered having regard to existing facilities in the area and the functions of new spaces intended to provide. Equally, shared use. The potential for maximising the use of open space facilities should be explored, for example, by sharing a park with nearby schools. This is a symbiotic relationship. And finally, biodiversity. Public open spaces, especially the larger ones, should provide for a range of natural habitats and facilitate the preservation of flora and fauna. So open spaces and parks are not just green space. They're a place for physical and mental well-being, not just an amenity, but equally for infrastructure integrated with the economy, environment and people in mind. They are the first line of defence against climate change. Parks and open spaces are not just simply nice to have, they are a necessity for healthy, happy communities impacting on social cohesion of society. So bringing us back to our key questions, and I have just to lay them alongside the quantitative standards data. And I would think that if you were enticed to put forward a submission data, if one were to look at the key questions and equally cross-reference the quantitative standards, review your area data, see where you live, see the parks you currently access data, and walking yourself through these questions data and looking at the standards data, this could bring you to a very logical submission data, because at the very end of this is your development plan data. The importance is that it will be providing for you data for your generations beyond data. This will set the standard for the next number of years data, and this I would think are two great tools data to bring the data to provide data the resource data to be able to in order data to make a submission. And finally, data I've just included, there is the tool data, or the option data where to go data if you so wish to make a submission. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Owen, for that presentation. Unfortunately, we had a slight problem with sharing your slides, so the presentation from Owen will be available on the Development Plan website from tomorrow, also at consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. So thanks very much for that, Owen. And again, the Q&A is open there if you'd like to respond to any questions coming in there for you following the points you laid out in your presentation. So now we finished with our speakers this evening, and we'll move on to our Q&A session. So there's been a wide range of questions coming in, and our speakers are getting through those as we speak. So I just maybe like to start with Maurice. Maybe you can comment on some of those that have come in. So Maurice, if you'd just like to have a look at some of these questions. And I see while there was a wide range, I'll just focus on one or two because I know you'll get back to those and they will be published tomorrow. There was one comment just on accessibility, just noting that the square in Garvan was not very accessible for wheelchairs, and just maybe through the development plan, are disability groups being consulted, and you know how is accessibility being considered within the preparation of the draft plan. And there was also the comment raised about the Parisian model of developing our spaces so that all facilities are within a 10 or 15 minute walk or cycle. And just again, you might comment on what percentage of new builds by the council will reflect universal design principles. So if you could comment on some of those and maybe reach on any other questions that you'd like to comment on very briefly. We are running near the end of our session, so thank you for that, Maurice.
Yeah, well, I suppose all our building projects we would consider universal design principles. We would, I suppose, it's probably separated into two separate areas. The likes of the main street in Tramore, which rises at 1 in 10, poses some very, very difficult problems to comply with universal design principles. Other areas, such as the square in Dungarvan, not so much. There would always be a section in the brief when briefing our consultants that the universal design principles would always be an underlying factor. We try to design for, I suppose, we think about it ourselves in our studio, the very young and the very old, to make all our projects as accessible as possible. But sometimes there are issues. We try to work through them. We would like, I suppose, to consult with various groups with varying abilities more, and we would have done in the past on specific projects. We would have engaged with particular groups and are always open to do so. The more accessible our projects are, the happier we are about them. I suppose that's it. The Parisian model, making everything. Well, I suppose there's connectivity issues within our city, and I think one of the comments spoke about connectivity issues in the suburbs. We got into difficulty sometime, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, when we stopped building streets, and when we started, we went away from that network. Now we're trying to get back to that. We're trying to look, as I suppose, I think about the city centre and the way we've approached the city centre. We've broken it down into small pieces. We've tried to increase the connectivity, and we've tried to increase the diversity of activity within those areas. We'll slowly spread that out through the city. We've been talking with the NTA about some initiatives that they have to make these, I suppose, simple connections, but other connections are far more difficult to make. There was a third, Vanessa, but I just can't remember what it was. You might.
Let me just see, what was that? I think that covered it really, in terms of the disability groups being consulted as well, and the percentage of the new builds and that Parisian model. There are a range of further questions, and it would be great if you could expand on those answers you've just given as well, just for when these are published tomorrow. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Maurice?
No.
Nope, that's great. Okay, so we'll move on then to Vinny. Thanks very much, Maurice, for your comments. So Vinny, some questions have come in there, and an interesting one that's just popped up here is with regard to the Flemish decree, and it asks, can the council take into account the Flemish decree, or must it await a central government response in relation to easing the requirement for a local link to an area when applying for permission to build a once-off rural house? And also, if you might just want to comment, you made some interesting points about, COVID and the change now with people moving back to rural areas. Would you like to comment on that with regard to the regional spatial and economic strategy, and how that supports that, or?
Yeah, I suppose, Vanessa, maybe Lee might answer the question in relation to the Flemish decree, given I suppose it's very much a planning, and it might have a national policy perspective on it in relation to the progression of it. But yeah, I think there's an opportunity maybe for it to be a bit more flexible and innovative in particularly with regards to submissions that come forward. We are in a changed environment, so it's not like your 2010 or 2015 development plan. The landscape has changed significantly. It had changed anyway as a result of I suppose, economic developments and people migrating from rural areas to urban areas, and all of a sudden it's actually changed. And I suppose it maybe it might require planners and all different agencies to work collectively to ensure that if there's a migration back towards rural places, that can be facilitated with a development plan. So flexibility in approaches is no bad thing, and maybe communities and agencies in particular, like health-related agencies, I see submissions there from the Older Person Council, like they can certainly inform things that we should be looking at, rather than maybe following on from past iterations of a development plan process. And the other query, I think Lee would be more placed, I think, to answer.
Thanks very much for that, Vinny. And Lee, we might just hand over to you then, if you'd like to take that question related to the Flemish decree and the requirement for a local link to an area when applying for permission to build a one-off rural house. If you'd like some comments on that, and also just after that, Liam, if you could maybe mind commenting on the place standard questionnaire that's out as well, or maybe we'll hand that over to Hugh because that's also open as part of the consultation process. Thank you.
Yeah, in relation to rural housing, I suppose what we've got to do first is we've got to develop a core strategy for the county. This is a mandatory requirement on all local authorities. The core strategy and the settlement strategy will set out targets for housing in different locations, so that whether that be in an urban location, in the city, in the towns, in the villages, or in the open countryside. And once that strategy is in place, then we can look at the more detailed requirements in relation to, site-specific considerations for rural housing. So, there is a long process here. The development plan will take 2 years to develop from here to when it's finally adopted. We will be having regard to national guidelines, to the national planning framework, and to the regional, spatial and economic strategy. As we move forward, I know the department, the minister and the officials within the department are looking actively at that Flemish decree to see to what extent that might impact on rural housing policy across the country as a whole, and we're awaiting guidance from the department in that regard. But I suppose the detail of a rural housing policy will come midway through the process. We have to go through the housing need demand assessment exercise to determine how many homes are required, what sort of houses, what sort of tenure, and only then can we determine the numbers and the policies and the development control criteria that might apply. One other thing that just came up, and then maybe I'll hand on to Hugh in relation to the other issue that you raised, but one thing that I noticed from the questions is in relation to the local area plans. We were asked by a couple of contributors as to when the local area plans might be brought forward. We can't commence that process until the city and county development plan is in place, because those local area plans have to be consistent in every way with the city and county plan. So only when the city and county plan is adopted in mid-2022 can we commence that process. But we'll try and deal with all of the high-level strategic issues for those towns in the city and county development plan. So the local area plans then will fill in a certain level of detail afterwards. Specific interventions that the local authority might make, spending priorities, conservation objectives, amenity objectives, that type of thing. But I think the high level issues in relation to housing, education, transportation, infrastructure will be dealt with now in this process.
That's great. Thanks very much, Liam. And Hugh, if you'd just like to come in and maybe just comment while we're there talking about the process, just about the place standard survey that's also open. So when people visit consult@waterfordcouncil.ie, they can also, at the end of their submission, take part in this place standard survey. Could you just tell us a little bit about that as people after this meeting start thinking about participating in the process? Thanks, Hugh.
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I think it's an important element of what we're trying to achieve here, and it's probably timely in terms of the discussion that we're having tonight to look at, I suppose, asking the questions to people as to what their own, I suppose, their own perceptions of where they live or places that they know, what those are, and I suppose where they feel there may be shortcomings or where improvements may be needed. And that covers a range of issues, not just, I suppose, not just the public lighting and the street pavements and the parks, but it covers a lot of other things around, how safe you feel, issues around, the services that are available. So there are about, I think there's 14 sort of topics that people can rank in terms of one, say, between 1 and 7. So to either say it's good or it's lacking in some way or other. So I think it's important just that we use this opportunity to sort of pull that information in. It's not specifically relevant to the development plan process itself. It is, I suppose, important in terms of how we roll out our services over the course of any given year. So I think it's just timely that we get some submissions in on that. And I think there, in the last day or two, there's been some interest in it. So if we can keep that up, that would be great. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Hugh. And then finally, I'll just turn to Owen Delay. And Owen, there's a lot of positive feedback on your natural play policies for the development plan. Just a couple of questions there. One in relation to exercise station for older people in public spaces, just about that. And also, there's an aspiration for a new park of quite a large scale. And would you have any comment on that, and maybe something people could make submissions on in terms of locations and where that could be? Unfortunately, your slideshow didn't scroll through the slides.
Yeah, apologies on that, everybody. Tate, my sincere apologies. Tate, I'm sure you lost a lot of insight into what I was trying to describe, but I think, as you said, Vanessa, that hopefully it will be updated and people can roll back through it, and that because I suppose certainly a lot of my train of thought tonight was to provide the resource to bring people to, I suppose, a logical point to provide a submission. And I think part of your question was that in relation to a regional park date, and certainly that is a question that is requiring debate at this stage. That where it is located, again, equally I addressed how council acquire land. That so that there is models, but certainly I suppose that the underlying debate must be that is this something that we wanted included in our development plan? That I would think that certainly that within Waterford, that in the Waterford city region, that it needs logical thought and debate. That it would add more that in the realm that of public parks and open spaces, that further that to provide these amenities for the people of Waterford. That I think the second part of your question you asked me in relation to play items or exercise items, apologies, that we would have a number of these within our parks. That ideally one location is that at the Kilbarry Nature Park, but again that this could be further that enhanced throughout our parks, and looking at the hierarchy of parks, that should it be the case that an objective could quite possibly become in the development plan that based upon the park size, that this is one of the facilities that the local authority must provide. So again, this is the opportunity for each and every one that I suppose to make their views heard and felt. That particularly because we're looking at a broad context of parks within the city and the county. But this is the opportunity, I would think, that and it fits within the model of what parks are trying to achieve. It's about recreation. So I suppose it's having that included. Certainly. Thanks, Vanessa.
That's great, Owen. Thank you very much. And we've now come to the close of our meeting. I know our speakers could only touch on a few of the very many and varied questions that have come in, but don't worry, because they will all be responded to and put up on the website tomorrow. If you don't have that address, it's consult.waterfordcouncil.ie, and just click into the development plan page and you will see it there. You will also see a recording of tonight's webinar, as well as the slides from Owen. As a reminder, the closing date for submissions is the 14th of September at 5 p.m. So please do get started on those. And if you can, promote the consultation among your friends and family and networks, because it does affect everybody in the county, and everyone has an opportunity to shape the future of the next 6 years. So it's an opportunity to have your say now. We do have another webinar tomorrow evening, and that will be on the economy and agriculture and education. And we hope that you'll be able to join us then. But if not, we'd like to thank all of our speakers, and most importantly, thank you very much for joining us this evening, for your attention and your questions. So have a lovely evening, and we hope to be seeing your submissions soon. Thank you very much.